So we have another really exciting update with a bunch of new features that will help you make even better games. And now going to quickly take you through some of the new big additions. So the first thing is let's take through all the additions to the rule system. So let's say I'm going to long press on the character and add a custom rule. The first thing you can do is you can now play VFX via the rule system. So I'm just going to quickly create something super simple. Whenever I tap in the world, you'll now see inside the game object you have spawn VFX. Now spawn VFX takes two things. First, it's a position where you want to spawn it in the world, and the second is the VFX that you want to spawn. So you can choose now from this library of VFX of which ones you want to spawn. And now if I go and play this, as I tap, you see that it spawns that confetti. Now speaking about vectors, we also have added a much requested feature, which is now a vector parameter. So you can now create your own vector parameters very easily and then use them in the rules that you create. So I'm just going to set this to this position. And now instead of this hard-coded vector value, I can instead use that parameter that I just created. And now as I tap, you see it creates spawns that particle effect at that position. Now, the other things that we've added, obviously, is that you can also now very conveniently edit your vector parameter right from the pop-up over here. Right, so I'm just going to say, hey, spawn this instead of this new position. As I tap, see it gets spawned at that new position. Other cool additions to the rule system is that you can now also access the camera entity from any location, right? So I can say game get object type, and you now see that you have this new camera object over there. And now once you use that in the next line, you'll see that it has its camera rule on it, so you can now affect the camera entity from any object. And another useful addition is inside the collisions rule. So now inside the collisions rule, you'll see there's a new block which says stop touching object, and that's really useful for creating various sort of like triggers where you want to have something happen when you touch an object, and then something to stop happening when you stop touching an object. So those are some of the big additions to the rule system. Now, exiting from the rule system, let's look at the new objects that we have added. So when you go into the objects tab, first you'll see that there are a couple of new additions, which are essentially projectiles in the palette down here. And we've given you now much more powerful and flexible control over projectiles. So let's just say I'm going to place this turret right here. I'm going to hit play, and it does what you expect it to do, right? It shoots these projectiles. But let's just say that I want this turret to shoot something else instead. You can now actually do that. So when I long press on this turret, inside the turret rule, you'll see it has this new thing called projectile. You can actually select what it should shoot out. And you can also select the size of the projectile that it should shoot out. So let's just say that I'm going to add a text entity right over here. I'm going to name this boom, and say I want the turret to now shoot this out instead. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go on to this. I'm going to add a couple of new rules, which is lifetime, so how long it should stay alive before it self-destructs. And then I'm also going to add a new movement to it, which is called move forward, right? So and now very simply, I'm going to go into the projectile, into the turret, and be like, instead of shooting out those projectiles, shoot out this text instead. And just for cleaning it up, I'm going to delete this one from the world. So the new workflow of creating a projectile, and a projectile can be anything now, is that you just quickly place it into the scene, you add whatever rules you want to add to it, so it behaves the way you want, then simply delete it from your world. Now when I hit play, you'll see that the turret is shooting out that instead. So using that same workflow, if you want to edit the actual default projectile, you just select it from the palette, place it into the world, long press on it, and then you'll see all the different rules on it that you can edit. And you can go really crazy with this. Maybe you want a projectile that shoots out, maybe you want a turret that shoots out a turret that shoots out a turret that eventually shoots out a projectile. So you kind of get a sense. You can go as crazy with this as you want. In addition to that, we also have this new. So let me just place these two NPCs into the world, right? I'm going to rotate this around here, and I'm going to drag it around. And when you see, when I drag it around, you now can see the position of that object, right? So if you want to know the position of an object, you simply press down on it, and you can see its position, and you'll also see it update as you move it around in the world. So previously, NPCs or enemies or any damager rule by default only damaged the player. But now we have added this new option right here where you can actually select what all it damages. So perhaps I want these enemies to not only damage the player, but also damage themselves when they collide with each other. So it's very easy now to do that. And just to demonstrate that, I'm going to set the damage to maximum. And when I hit play, you'll see that they self destruct when they collide. So another way to add some more gameplay options to your game. And then going into the object library. So you have a bunch of really interesting things added to the object library. First things, we have lots of primitive shapes. And you'll see that we have two styles of these four primitive shapes, right? And they're marked with these red dots. The red dots either at the bottom of the shape or in the center of the shape. And this essentially defines the pivot. And I'll show that to you visually now. So I'm going to place this cube right over here. I'm going to place the other cube with the red dot in the center right over here. And you'll see immediately where it gets placed, right? So the pivot of these two cubes is different. But you also have per axis manipulation over these two shapes. So now I can long press on this and you'll see it has two rules on it, scale, and I can now scale it on any axis that I want. And you'll see how it's scaling, right? It's scaling from that bottom pivot. And in this case, I'm just going to move this up a bit. When I scale this one, you'll see it scales around the middle and also rotates around the middle. Whereas this one right here will rotate around that bottom pivot. So with this, you can create a bunch of interesting objects in your world and not be restricted just by the assets that we provide. And then we also have new ways of adding verticality to your level, which are these stairs and these slopes. So quickly to demonstrate that, let's just say I place a few blocks into the world. I'm going to go into paint mode and just paint a few stairs and slopes right here. You can of course then go in and skin them however you want. And now when you go hit play, you can see your character can now run up these stairs and these slopes. And in addition to this, there are also a bunch of other fixes and a bunch of other smaller improvements that you can explore on your own. I'm excited to see what you build with this.